When the attack happened in Libya and Gaddafi was being taken down, a number of African presidents said, wait, hold. We will fly into Libya and we can have some kind of diplomatic conversations. The feedback from external actors to them was, if you fly into Libyan airspace, we cannot guarantee your security. I want you to think about that for a minute, that heads of state of the African continent were told this on our continent. And ladies and gentlemen, what is Libya today? What is Libya today? And it happened on our watch.
Some Africans have started asking questions. They want to know if Africa is really independent. These are questions which we were supposed to ask long time ago, but it's better late than never. I have chanced upon an interesting video which I want us to watch. I will be back.
Julie, for the 2 years I recall being in the UN Security Council, I was exposed to many files, many African files, as they're treated in the Security Council. And what I discovered is that to be free and to be secure is extremely demanding. As a government and as the leaders of governments, you need to have extreme levels of attentiveness, strategic thinking, and a complete rejection of domination of your mind and your intentions. And you have to do that not once in a while, you have to do that every single day. The sheer pressure to be competent and to be independent is overwhelming. And that is why the most necessary measures we need to take in the next coming years is to essentially begin to reshape the incentives of leadership and to raise a new generation of African leaders who are ready to stand in the pressure room. Because to lead your country in Africa towards security and towards prosperity requires special qualities that few single people have. It is usually groups of people. And how to produce them, how to motivate them, how to incentivize them, how to identify them and develop them is the most pressing challenge that we have today.
Wow, that's incredibly powerful. And I'm going to just repeat that. A new generation of African leaders who are ready to stand in the pressure room. And experts. Enough experts to put the attention on the issues, on the documents, on the positions, on the scenario building, on the collaboration and the alignment that needs to take place. So like an army of young people who are capable from the continent of doing this at country level, at regional level, and then I guess at global level. Very, very interesting. Victor.
But perhaps
yes.
Sorry, I don't want to hang my hat on expertise.
Okay.
There's plenty of expertise to go around. But a lot of it is performative expertise. We need expertise that is rooted in political will, and political will that is rooted in political incentives. And this requires simply a revolution in leadership, and then the expertise will follow, and it'll flow naturally.
Before I leave you on that, you talk about the incentives. What do these incentives look like? If we talk about action-oriented solutions, give us an inkling of what these might look like.
Well, the African state was never built to succeed. It was never built to deliver independence or prosperity to Africans. So when we took it over, there was ambitions to transform it, and by transforming the state, transform the citizen. I saw a phrase once describing the Kenyan state that said, Kenya is a government-chasing nation. We believed that by transforming the state, we could transform the citizen. We had big dreams. Those dreams have narrowed ever since. We now are mostly in the mode of survival. And I think one of the lessons I have that tells me that it is entirely possible is sitting right here in Kigali. Right. Because we have seen Rwanda rise from a state whose incentives were the destruction of its population, were the perpetrating of hatred, the weaponization of identity, and incompetence, and moved steadily under a different group of people to embrace competence and delivery and responsibility. So it's possible. It's imminently possible. It's only a question of us taking the examples that are there and trying to be copycats.
Thank you for that. Victor, let me come to you next. China has gone through an incredible evolution over the past few decades. It seems to have been very intentional, very strategic. But give us an overview. When you look at the geopolitical pressures and how they impact Africa, what are you seeing? And are there lessons in what China has done that you can share with the world and perhaps Africa could just take a look at?
Thank you very much, Julia. Your Excellencies, Generals, Officers, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor to attend today's inaugural session of ISCA. It's my first visit to this great country of Rwanda, but I'm sure it will not be my last. Just like all of you, I listened very carefully to His Excellency President Kagami's important speech. I cannot agree with him more when he said, African security cannot be outsourced. I think President Kagame is not only a great leader of Rwanda, he's a great leader of Africa, and is a great statesman in the world of today. Now, when you say you cannot outsource security to other countries, in a sense, it means Africa needs to use your own brain power to make up your own judgment. In the world of today, you hear a lot of talks about whether, Africa should be forced to make a choice between China versus the United States. I think that's the wrong choice. The real choice for Africa, as well as for the rest of mankind, is whether the United States is doing the right thing or is doing the wrong thing, or whether China is doing the right thing or doing the wrong thing. If the United States is doing the right thing, work with the United States. But if the United States is doing the wrong thing, why should you bother about working with the United States or following its leadership? Similarly, if China is doing the right thing, why don't you want to work with China? And, God forbid, if China is doing the wrong thing, why should you work with China? That means African countries, people in Africa, need to use their own brain power to make a decision first, whether this country or that country is doing the right thing or the wrong thing. Don't be forced by any other country to make a choice which will not serve your fundamental interest. Now, when I traveled a little bit in Rwanda yesterday, in Kigali, let me tell you my real observation. I think Kigali is in better shape today compared with China back in 1978, when China started to reform and opening to the outside world, attracting FDI into China. The philosophical point I want to emphasize is that if China can do this in 46 years, Rwanda and Africa can do it in the coming 4 decades or so. Have faith in yourself. Keep faith in yourself. China is a success story which can be repeated by the great people here in Rwanda and the great people here in Africa. Now, another piece of advice. What is the foundation upon which security should be based? Not only for Rwanda, but for Africa. Security never exists in a vacuum. Security should be based on several things, which are the pillars. One is maintain stability at home. The other one is keep peace with your neighbors. And the third one, as Deng Xiaoping, for whom I had the great honor to work with before, development is the hard truth. Develop, develop, develop. In that context, whichever country which can really help you to achieve your development goal, he should be a friend. But don't be diverted. Don't be confused by some other country coming to you, say, no, let's put a premium on certain other things, on values, etc. And I do not want to build a bridge or a highway or a railway or a power station in your country. But if those countries which build these infrastructure projects in your country, they are not really meant good for you. No, that's not the truth. Decide with yourself. Use your own judgment as to which countries are really helping you to beef up infrastructure connectivity, your manufacturing capabilities, and in the African context in itself, power generation. You need power. You need to generate power. I understand, even in this great country of Rwanda, you may not have sufficient amount of power. Focus on that. Get that done. That will provide a much better context, whereby security for Rwanda, security for Africa as a continent will be better reinforced. Thank you.
Wow. Excellent. Very, very practical, pragmatic. I love the, stability at home, peace with your neighbor, develop. It feels though a lot of the world is moving away from that, and there's a real interest-based, almost bullying, temperament coming into diplomacy, right? But we'll come back to that. And Mark, first, let me come to you for your thoughts.
Thank you, Julie, and many thanks to the organizers of this conference. I'm really honored and humbled.
Please go a bit closer to the mic.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Is it better?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm really honored and humbled to be here today, and I would like to thank warmly the organizers. I prepared a few talking points in English, but then I realized that Her Excellency Louise Mushiki-Wabo was sitting at the first row. She's the General Secretary of the Francophonie, so I guess that would be a diplomatic issue if I would continue in English. So let me switch to French. And I don't want to get into trouble with you. La notion de sécurité qui est dans le titre de ce...
In this panel can be understood differently. We can talk about human security, but there's also security in terms of defense. We have many people in uniform, high-ranking officers and others. So my first instinct was to focus on security in terms of defense. So over the last few years, we've changed our strategic cycle from the 20-year cycle, from 20 to 2020, and in countries like France, we were focused on anti-terrorism and together with the United States. So it was visible in our doctrines and strategies with the national security strategy in the United States and in France, with the national strategy review in France. So this is related to the terrorist threat. So Africa had a very important place, because the terrorism was developing in Africa visibly. So those countries were involved in the continent's security. So the period has changed. It changed around 2021, 2022. We will see the United States withdrawing from Afghanistan, and France ending Operation Barkhane. We've seen paramilitaries in Africa. So what happened after that? We have a power competition, a strategic competition, which is focused on competition between superpowers. And the thing is, for Europe, but also for the United States, Africa became less central. So we became more focused on the East and Russia, and the United States was focused more on China. So that's the first point. That's a paradigm change that we need to keep in mind. Second, security, which is the center of this panel, can also be understood as an economic or political market with demand and offer. So with demand was explained clearly. It's not about outsourcing security. And when you talk about the offer has become less and less. There's less will to involve militarily in other countries. And other countries, because you don't want to infringe on sovereignty. And so the security in terms of defense was not really what it should have been. And when you look at the theme of this panel, with this fragmented world, you see a multipolar world with geopolitical blocs that are competing against each other. And Africa's security is also related to security of other parts of the world. You see those conflicts outside of Africa have an impact on Africa. It's the case with Ukraine. And the consequences were felt in Africa, especially with food security, but also for defense proper. I've had a conversation with an African minister in West Africa after the invasion of Russia. So it became difficult for them to have essential military capacity to fight jihadists, because focus was more on aid to Ukraine. Aid by the Western countries. The last point I wanted to emphasize is that this era of geopolitical competition can be a trap for many countries. So we need to avoid being trapped within an external influence to another. We need to diversify partnerships instead of being exclusive. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And, it takes me very neatly into my next series of questions. And I believe we've kind of started to answer, at national level and on the continent, what are some of the solutions. We've talked through some of those things, some very practical examples coming out. I think the role that ISCA will play, standing alongside the AU and the peace and security mechanisms within the AU, could be a very important mechanism. But let's talk about our multilateral systems. And I want to use some examples. When the attack happened in Libya and Gaddafi was being taken down, a number of African presidents said, wait, hold. We will fly into Libya and we can have some kind of diplomatic conversations. The feedback from external actors to them was, if you fly into Libyan airspace, we cannot guarantee your security. I want you to think about that for a minute, that heads of state of the African continent were told this on our continent. And ladies and gentlemen, what is Libya today? What is Libya today? And it happened on our watch. It happened on our watch. Ladies and gentlemen, Rwanda, 1994. Dilly-dallying over the word genocide at the United Nations Security Council saw 1 million people dead in how many days? And who solved the problem? We had to solve the problem. His Excellency and a small force came back in and had to build this country from scratch, ladies and gentlemen. And today we still get lectures and hear lectures about human rights, and there's something wrong. I want to talk about South Africa today. In South Africa today, we are hearing narratives being built around white genocide in South Africa. You are security actors, you understand the import of these narratives and why are they being placed in the international scene? Why is this happening? What could it open up? Gaza today, ladies and gentlemen, where we've seen the brutalization and the massacre of tens of thousands of children. The multilateral systems, I'm going to come to each of you and ask, are they working? can they hold? And if they cannot hold, and Africa has never been given an adequate seat at the table. Martin, you can talk about that. Perhaps I'm wrong. You can correct me. But where does Africa stand? 54 nations? A strong continent, resource-rich, fastest-growing continent in the world. Where do we deserve to sit? Your Excellency, let me come to you on this. Multilateral systems and how do we maneuver this very serious reality, please?
Écoutez, le multilatéralisme actuel est un multilatéralisme de puissance. Et cela se justifie parce qu'il a résulté de la Seconde Guerre mondiale.
That we're talking about is a multilateralism of superpowers that emerges from the end of the Second World War. And this has forged the world as it is today. Regarding Africa, let me come back to what President Kagame said this morning. He talked about ownership, the relationship between governance and security, and the necessity of cooperation. African states themselves, because the history of this continent that has been occupied, creating a system, a social system and a political system inherited from colonization. This same continent, does it have appropriate institutions? We should ask ourselves these questions. Now, regarding the correlation between governance and security, if the population does not accept the system, it generates itself insecurity. And third, we are 50 countries in Africa. We can't each individually guarantee our own security. That's why we need to cooperate sub-regionally and continentally. This is a logical structure. You mentioned Libya. The African Union designated 5 heads of state. They met in Nouakchott and they had to move to Libya. These were heads of state and their flight was refused. We had to negotiate until they arrived. What happened once they arrived in Libya? Gaddafi was ready to quit power. He was ready to step down. He said that to heads of state. Despite that, NATO intervened and went as far as assassinating him. Now, 15 years later, we see cases, court cases, Sarkozy being tried in France. You see, these are the consequences of such behavior. Now, Rwanda, 1994, we have a peacekeeping mission. We see genocidal tendencies and we look the other way. Today, the same type of peacekeeping mission is challenged. What about us as Africans? Have we succeeded? The model that we copied, does it correspond to our needs? And this brings us back to the idea of ownership. We should own our security, social and political system. Our population needs to accept that system that we are proposing, and we need to position ourselves vis-à-vis the rest of the world. You said that in South Africa, Afrikaners are being given the refugee status in the US. Look, we have the history. Only a man like Mandela was able to impose a rainbow nation. Who is the victim in this? Who owns the land in South Africa? Who owns the land? I think everybody knows that. Now, you wanted to make South Africa and the ANC look like criminals and you call them genocidal forces. That's not realistic. Maybe it is hiding something else behind. but this is not realistic. I think we need to be realistic, and this actually points to our weakness as a continent. I think all kinds of ideas are being experimented. This is one more reason for us as Africans to understand the depth and the risk that this situation represents. We need to do better and faster.
We need to do better and faster. Martin, let me come to you.
Yeah, Julie, your questions are very provocative. Let me begin by saying that the multilateral system, as reflected in the United Nations...
Please bring the mic a bit closer.
Yeah. The United Nations was built primarily to prevent great war between the great powers. That's not all it was supposed to do, but this was its primary reason. And for that reason, it needed to have the great powers of the day to stay around the table and to be assured that the United Nations as a political construct would not be used against their vital interests as they saw them. The price of keeping them at the table was to give them the veto. And because of that ability to veto what the rest of the organization thinks or wants to do, and what all countries want or may want to do, it then assures that the permanent members will stay, and then posits that there'll be a possible diplomatic solution from that. In many ways, since we have not had a world war since 1945, you can say that the United Nations arrangement in its most basic terms has succeeded. But it has failed its promise to stop wars elsewhere. And often the veto power has been used to shield the allies and fellow travelers of the great powers when they're committing atrocities. The Security Council has been used as a platform to launch attacks against the very interests of Africa, for instance, the NATO attack on Libya. So what does Africa do in terms of this multilateralism that we belong to? One of the most ironic things about being an African diplomat in the UN is that you're often defending the very system that you're marginalized in. I find that all the time so strange. And I myself have been one of the more ferocious defenders of that system, even while understanding the inequities and marginalizations of my own continent from them. What it means is that the expectation of Security Council reform as a form of favor or an act of inclusion is naive. You do not get included in the permanent ranks of the Security Council to be a substantive member who can wield the veto just because. You have to generate your own form of power and independence so that you sit at that table as an equal. As I like to provoke, you can go to the Security Council permanent membership like a proud peacock, but you may emerge like a plucked chicken. Because the Security Council veto and permanent membership is only one dimension of national power that is arrayed against other intelligence, security, economic, and political powers. So the question for Africa when it comes to multilateralism is to go beyond the demand for inclusion and look inward and talk about the demand for leverage. What is it that allows Africa the leverage to sit in the permanent ranks? What is it that allows Africa to demand a seat at the table and to get it, not because we've been left out, but because of our leverage? And to me, Julie, that comes to coming back to our institutions, our security architectures, reimagining and re-energizing them, coming back to the original reasons we build the African peace and security architecture, being true to that architecture, making sure that the parts of it that have been captured or diverted by others are retaken back into our hands so that we're able to use them. Finally, when it comes to some of those particular emergencies that you talked about, from Gaza to Sudan and elsewhere, It seems to me that it doesn't take 193 members of the UN to decide on anything for the UN to move. What it requires is for a committed group of leaders, 5, 6, less than 10 committed African leaders can shift and change the multilateral system to be more responsive to Africa's definition of its interests. And those interests include the self-determination of the Palestinian people. And that's only because we ourselves are the products of self-determination. We can never turn away from it in principle or even politically. So leverage, leverage, leverage. And that leverage comes from development, development, development. And that development comes from independent thinking and ownership of our own process and our own states.
Thank you so much. Victor, please.
Thank you, Julia. Several brief observations. First of all, the world order which we are living through, which was founded back in 1945, was never meant to be a unipolar world. And that's the reason why you have the Security Council, you have the 5 permanent member states, and each of them have the veto power. Therefore, if you hear any country in the world today saying it is the only surviving hegemon in the world, false, because it does not represent the legitimacy of the international order established back in 1945 after defeating Nazi Germany in the European theater and the Japanese fascism in the Asian Pacific theater. So we should be very proud members in the world community based upon multipolarity and multilateralism centered around the United Nations. Now, in more recent years, especially after the war in Ukraine and more recently the atrocities committed in Gaza against the civilians, we hear a lot of complaints about the inefficiency and the sometimes failure of the United Nations. I agree with all these assessments. On the other hand, I also agree with the ambassador, because let's be the devil's advocate. I think the United Nations has at least achieved in one thing, that is the prevention of the outbreak of another world war ever since 1945. The relations between the General Assembly on the one hand and the Security Council on the other hand, and within the Security Council between those non-permanent member states versus the 5 permanent member states, and for the 5 permanent member states, each with a veto power, the relations, the dynamics are very, very complicated, very, very well-defined sometimes. And sometimes I think the real design is meant for an impasse, because you do not want to see any situation in the world getting out of control from a country-to-country war to become a regional war, and from a regional war to become a total world war again. So I think while we have lots of complaints about the United Nations, we need to take comfort in one thing. That is, it is actually successful in preventing the total outbreak of another world war. Now, what does that leave for Africa, for example? I think 2 things need to be done. First of all, Africa needs to be further consolidated and strengthened. African Union should really be more consolidated so that eventually, I hope personally, for all the Security Council meetings of the United Nations Security Council, there will always be a representative representing Africa. So it is not one of the 15 member states of the Security Council of the United Nations, but African voices need to be fully reflected in the proceedings. And consultation need to be made for African wisdom and leadership, etc. And great leaders in Africa, especially great leader like President Kagame, for example, need to lead Africa and lead the African nation to project the African voices to the United Nations General Assembly on the one hand, and especially in the Security Council. Now, the other thing, allow me to mention, is that while we always talk about securities on the one hand versus development, but these 2 things are integrally intimately integrated. They cannot be separated. And allow me to warn all of us. We are now already in the middle of this AI revolution, artificial intelligence. I'm very much concerned about the AI divide. And the AI divide will exist between humans, for example, you with very sophisticated chips embedded in your brain, I without, between companies, between governments, between militaries, between cultures, and between civilizations. What we need to do is to really accelerate whatever we do to make sure no country is left behind, especially African countries. When you travel throughout the corners of African continent, you have the worry that Africa is not fully integrated into this AI tsunami, AI revolution. We need to speed up. We need to mobilize all resources. And I think the open source, the AI development as represented by DeepSeek in China represents a new trend. That means lower cost, enabling all participants to play a useful role, and African continent and all the African countries have a choice to really play a very significant role. Because otherwise, the real competition may not be between China or the United States or China and Europe. The real competition in the coming years may be AI versus Homo sapien.
Wow.
We need to be prepared, and we need to really speed up. Thank you very much.
Wow, that's very interesting. And for security stakeholders, somewhere to dive in. Mark, please go ahead.
Le multilatéralisme est un grand mot, un grand concept qui a fait rêver. Effectivement, on pense immédiatement au système onusien, né après la Deuxième Guerre mondiale, mais qui immédiatement, quelques années plus tard, a déjà été freiné.
After the Second World War, the Cold War dampened the enthusiasm, and this paralyzed the Security Council for a long time. Now, after the Cold War, we believed again in this dream of multilateralism, and we dreamt of Pacific international relations, and now we are back to tensions.
Le système multilatéral, le système...
And the UN system, the multilateral system is suffering, has major difficulties. And you can also observe that the Security Council has been blocked many times by the veto power in the last few months and years. We also observe that UN agencies are having major financial difficulties. Large members of the Security Council are contesting the international order as it was constructed after the Second World War, and this leads to problems that seem hard to solve. But the multilateral system cannot be reduced to that. We can talk about multilateralisms in plural. There are other organizations such as the Francophonie and others. I think what will happen in the following years will be a wait-and-see system where the UN will continue to be blocked with lack of innovation, lack of empowerment, lack of innovation, or those will gain strength. We talk about regional multilateralism, so I think these new organizations will give us new perspectives. Allow me to say one thing about Libya, because it was mentioned by two people. This situation is very complicated, and I think historians, when the archives will be opened, will do their work. We know that takes time for historians to do their work, but I think some truth will come out. For France, that's a situation where there were revolutions in many countries of the Arab world, and there were issues in Libya, and the leader was talking about crushing the revolution, and his own son was talking about blood flowing. When you see armored vehicles rolling in streets, what do? Do you intervene? The responsibility to protect, does it enter into force or not? I agree that intervention should be criticized, but sometimes you need to look at the facts and wonder what would have happened had the intervention not taken place.
I'm going to be the devil's advocate. Yes, okay, you can start. Thank you. Go ahead, Bob. Very quickly, and then I do want to come to the floor.
Très rapidement.
Contributions, not questions, because our time is very tight.
Yeah, I just want to take that one example of Libya and see what are the possibilities of when I talk about leverage, so that I say something that's a bit of a solution. There were 3 African countries in the Security Council at the time of that decision. If you go back and look at how they voted and why they voted the way they voted, you will then see that they did not have a consensus as the 3 of them. And you then ask the African 3 on the Security Council, what is it that can make them strong enough to maneuver in that moment? And between that time and today, the African 3 has changed a lot. And that change has been, 1, the deepening integration of the Africa 3 to the African Union. So when you're sitting in the Security Council and you're one of the African 3, if you get a very clear signal from the Peace and Security Council of the African Union, it emboldens you a great deal for you to say, look, I would like to do what you're telling me to do, but unfortunately, the African Peace and Security Council has decided, so our hands are tied. Sometimes even when Chair Moussa Faki would speaking for the Commission, but because the Peace and Security Council is quiet, we would use his words to say as if, Moussa, you are talking for the whole of Africa. And we would try and use that as a leverage point. We then had a unity with the CARICOM states, which was called the A3+, when St. Vincent came in and said, on the basis of Pan-Africanism, if the 3 of African countries agree on any issue, we will automatically vote for them. The difference between 3 members and 4 members in the Security Council is considerable. Now imagine a strong Peace and Security Council of Africa that is independent, that is decisive, that makes clear decisions in a timely way. Then next imagine that Africa has a criteria for the candidates for the African 3 on the Security Council, not just regional circulation, but you're coming there with capabilities, you're coming there with determination, you're coming there with a track record of pursuing African interests. So if those 3 were put forward by Africa of that nature, who could combine with CARICOM, who can talk on the basis of peace and security decisions, believe me, you will often see China and others in Security Council automatically side with the African 3. You may not have a veto in terms of the law of the charter, but many, many times when you have that leverage, you have a de facto veto. So all is not lost. It's just a question of fixing 1 or 2 things decisively, and we can change a lot about how multilateralism works.
Thank you. Thank you for injecting the hope. As I come to the floor,
just one word
yes,
on Libya. Sincèrement, 14 ans après l'intervention de l'OTAN en Libye,
14 years after the intervention in Libya, there is no government. 14 years later in Libya, we don't have 5 heads of state who were designated. They went to Tripoli to convince Gaddafi. They went to Benghazi. These are facts. It was possible to stop war in Libya. The Americans acknowledged that later on. The French did, the English did, the British did that. They accepted that it was a monumental error. And what happened? Libyan arsenals were dumped into the Sahel. I'm from Chad. I was the Minister of Foreign Affairs. President Deby sent people. They bought so many arms, including some 7 that can hit aircraft. And today, a big part that is infected by terrorism is the Sahel. This is what happened in Libya. These are facts. Of course, historians can analyze this, but no one can convince us that things are different. Because today, 14 years later, Libya is still a failed state.
I'm not a security expert by any means, but as I come to the floor, you can clap. You can clap for His Excellency. As I come to the floor as an African, in response to your Libya comments, I just have a few questions. They don't need to be answered, but they need to be asked. Who will write the history? Who will write the history of what happened in Libya? Africa must. Africa must write its own history. Maybe others will do the same, but already you are hearing from His Excellency Moussa Faki what they saw. What was the role of Africa and African leaders, and why could international actors not give them the respect of sitting at the table with African leaders? That was the least that could have been done. You know, what is the standard of living for Libyans today? Is it better today than it was before the attack? Is Libya secure today? Are the neighbors of Libya secure today? And the final question, who earns from Libya's resources? Libya was a wealthy nation, oil producing. Who earns today? Do we know in this room where Libya's money goes? Africa. We have to ask the questions. We must. Let me please come to the floor. We'll try to take 4 comments, and then I'm going to come to a final question with the panel to look at unity, solidarity for Africa. There are mics on the side, so if you have a question, gentlemen over here, please, you can go that way. There's another gentleman, did I see? Yes, in uniform here at the front. Anyone on this side? I think there's a Senegal delegation who had requested to ask a question as well. The 3 of you can start. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much for you and your panelists. My name is Khalid Moussa. I'm the Charge of Affairs of Sudan. It is undisputable fact that the biggest crisis, humanitarian crisis and security crisis in Africa, in Sudan right now, when you have 13 million people displaced, 5 million refugees, and there is a war crime committed in the country. I do appreciate by the government of Sudan what the former Commissioner of Africa, Mr. Moussa Faki, did. Regardless, the crisis in Sudan reflects the institutional weakness of Africa. It is a dark spot in the conscience of Africa. That because for the second consecutive years, it's still going on, Africa doesn't do anything for the Sudanese people when we see the suffering. And when we talk about the owning the resolution for African problem, this is a clear weakness and a spot on the conscience of Africa. The main point I would like to deliver, which will affect all African countries, is about the paramilitary problem in Africa. Right now, RSF in Sudan, using Chinese drones, operated by Colombian mercenaries in Sudan, launching from neighboring countries, and more than that, nobody is talking about that at all. Funded by regional power, and Africa is silent, international community is silent, Sudanese people, they don't have anybody to support on that regard. Where is Africa? Where is international community? And in the panel, only one person mentioned Sudan, where it is the biggest humanitarian crisis in Africa right now. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for those comments. I will bring that back to the panel. There was a gentleman here. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, moderator, and good morning, everybody. I would like here to thank the panelists for the rich insight they give us. I'm Brigadier General Famouké Camara from Mali. I have to convey here the great warnings of my Chief of Defense for that invitation we had and that opportunity to expose here the case of Mali. The case of Mali is really a study case which can help all Africa, because the case of Mali is the consequence of the intervention in Libya. So we will not be able to rewrite the history. So I would like to elaborate on 3 points, the 3 points which are the main problems in Africa generally. The first problem is the lack of political and strategical coherence. Clausewitz, a great strategist, has said we need to have always that trinity between the people, the government, and the army. And unfortunately, that's not a reality because of the lack of vision and narratives. Who is the adversary? Who is the enemy? Sometimes it's misinterpreted, but done on purpose. Also, there is a lack of complementarity, a lack of synergy between the national elements of power. I mean here, diplomacy, economy, military, and so on. The second point is, that was at the domestic level, but the second point is at the international level, which influence, of course, the domestic level. It's the foreign interference through bilateral and multilateral channels. It goes through hinderings of the ownership of the assessment as well as the ownership of decision-making process. The priorities are most of the time dictated, or the assessment is made by external actors, like the fight against imperialism, neocolonialism. We all know that all states are driven by interest. So the approach, predatory approach, is kind of hindering African development. We have Balkan, we have ECOWAS. Sometimes you ask yourself, what is the objective? And the last point is the lack of reliable and credible strategic partner, which is very important. Africa sometimes is considered as a far or near enemy, which is a problem. We consider the partnership as a partner, but the partner in return is considered us as a far or near enemy because of his interests. Last but not least, also, it's the improvement of the military equipment. I mean, military and security equipments. They have all kinds of obstacles so that people cannot, countries cannot get it in order to ensure their security. To conclude, I will say there is nothing new under the sun. And some great authors, anti-colonialists, Frantz Fanon has said, each generation has to discover in a relative secrecy its mission, to fulfill it or to betray it. And in that case, the Sahel state alliances has discovered its mission, which is sovereignty, to gain the sovereignty, to contribute to the international peace and security. And also, the Sahel state also is convinced that each country counts at the international stage, either at a stake or as an actor. The Sahel State Alliances has decided to be an actor, will not be emergent. And we will do that by equipping ourselves with that relative power. As another great author said, Serge Sur, the power is the capacity to do, to have done, to refuse to do, and to prevent to do. So we are doing that by rejecting external interference in our mission of sovereignty. Also, we have to do that through connecting with credible and viable partnership, and we refuse to do it by cooperation. And last but not least, we prevent to do it because attacking any state of Sahel state alliances is attacking all the state of Sahel alliances. We need courage. I will leave with just a question.
Thank you, sir.
Please, just one question.
No. You might be a great politician one day. No, but I have to stop you. We don't have time.
Okay.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I'm coming back to the panel. Thank you. And I'm so sorry, just because of time, it's been such a rich conversation, but we do need to wind up. Before I come to each of your comments, just with a final contribution, Mark and Victor, from your end, and Martin and Your Excellency, I'll be looking to you for comments on solidarity, how Africa really builds our unity, yeah? But before that, Your Excellency, I wanted your comment on Sudan. It is a huge humanitarian crisis. It appears it's a proxy war. How does Africa just respond, contain? What is the way forward?
Je crois que le frère soudanais a parfaitement raison. Ce qui se passe au Soudan est dramatique.
Is right. What is happening in Sudan is dramatic. It's extremely acute, and certainly Africa has not done enough. But I would like to recall each and every one that in my former role as the chair of the Africa Union Commission, 10 days in terms of mission, I went to Khartoum. I met the military in all their different sections, including RSF, the political class and the civil society, and we put in place a team that supported different forces, political, social and military forces, to reach an agreement in August 2019, and they put in place a transition with a civil government which was led by Dr. Hamdallah. In October 2021, military forces, Al-Burhan and their deputy, General El-Meti, they did a coup and removed the civilian government. This led the African Union to suspend Sudan from their activities. And this is what really happened. When war broke out after the suspension of Sudan, I personally went to Khartoum 3 times to discuss, to engage, to discuss with military forces which were at to see how we can kickstart the transition process. And in April, there was the war that broke out. The president and the vice president. I would like to recall that RSF is a militia, but which was legalized by the Sudanese government as an army force belonging to the Sudanese army, and this is the truth in what happened. Therefore, external interference have become a manifest, and when 2 parties are using weapons and incredible arsenals and drones, so foreign interference is known. It's well known and it's developing, unfortunately. At the same time, we started a political process to try to bring to disaster, a humanitarian disaster. And which is more shocking is that today everybody is aware it is external forces, together with their weapons and ammunition, that are feeding the war, which has taken large proportions, and millions of Sudanese are refugees or displaced. The African Union tried their best. We don't have the political or diplomatic capacities. Even parties that is recognized, sometimes they are privileged for reasons that are theirs. External forces, be it diplomatic or political level, more than regional institutions such as IGAD or Africa Union. So this is an unacceptable situation, and all forces should be unified so that peace regains. Parties should accept dialogues. Parties should accept dialogues to put an end to that bleeding situation, which is fragilizing such a huge country. I personally, it's a country that I know, but nobody could imagine that Sudan would enter into such a war. And the biggest threat is that external interference are becoming more and more a serious issue, and nobody is talking. This is very worrying for us, even for the African continent in the future. Thank you so much.
Major focus for the African continent moving forward. Mark, final comments, please.
C'est pas simple de synthétiser, mais j'aimerais dire qu'effectivement, il y a un coût à l'intervention qui peut être très lourd. il peut aussi avoir un coût très lourd à la non-intervention. Les pays occidentaux ont aussi été pointés du doigt pour n'être pas intervenus.
Western countries have been pointed that they didn't intervene in Syria. We know that there was a civil war that led to hundreds of dead people. We need to draw lessons from interventions that have failed, and also the non-intervention that could also be very costly. But it was well explained. There's a willingness to more Africanize security and then to have African solutions to African problems. And I believe that there's no contradiction at that level as far as European countries and Western countries. But we need to understand what needs to be done, and we need to succeed in doing that. And my last word is that this is also a trend. We need to measure internal dynamism. There are foreign actors that can feed a dynamic, but sometimes instability situations do not always come from outside. It might impede or feed in internal dynamisms, and these are problems that need to be resolved in order to avoid developing instabilities.
Thank you for that. Victor, please.
Well, I'm saddened by the wars and the sufferings in countries like the Sudan and Mali and quite a few other African countries, which are plagued by not only civil wars but also cross-border wars of all kinds. I hope the African nations and African Union will have enough wisdom to come up with a framework where these wars, civil war or cross-border wars, can be not only timely be monitored, but also effective measures can be proposed so that they can be brought to an end more swiftly, and then it will not be allowed to escalate or spread over to more people. Because otherwise, the human sufferings in Africa will really take a great toll, and without stability, it is really difficult to expect that development can take great roots in any meaningful way. So security, peace, development are all intricately related to war or conflict, civil war, instability, etc. That's number one. Now, allow me to make a final point. I was in Doha on May the 14th, attending the Arab Strategy Forum, just on the eve of President Trump's state visit to UAE, and I made a proposal, and I want to make the same proposal now on this occasion. I said, Mr. President, President Trump, don't mess with free trade. Free trade is important. Free trade is important for all African countries. Without free trade, you cannot expect to achieve meaningful economic development. And without achieving meaningful economic development, your security will be eroded. It will not be established on solid rock foundations. Again, these things are all related. We need to do our best to promote peace, stability, and development for all African countries. And then this will re-enhance the security dimension for Africa as a whole and for each of the 54 African nations separately. That's my best hope.
Thank you
today,
so much.
I hope you will declare me as an African. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And I think that's a reminder also of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area and our responsibility to really bring that to life. That will be a big part of enabling peace and security on the continent. Martin, please.
Yeah, well, I could just answer with one sentence, but I'll increase a bit. Solidarity is for the courageous. You can never have the solidarity of cowards. And so what is the basis of our courage? You know, when you read about revolutions in your history books and when you're in class, they look very tidy. When you read about 1789 in France or 1917 in Russia, it appears very, very simple, it almost one thing leads to another. It seems very logical. When you're living through a revolution, it's very confusing. And you don't know exactly what is happening and what's about to happen, because many of the things you've assumed to be permanent turn out to actually be like clouds in the sky. And I think we're in one of those moments. Today, the multipolar world is appearing, not for the first time. The world has mostly been multipolar, but it is reappearing. Many of us are trained to think in a unipolar world since the 1990s, depending on your age. So to think in a multipolar world is not easy. Next, the weaponization of trade and investment is underway. These rivalries are not just rivalries for political primacy or civilizational primacy, even though they are that, but they're also claims for economic supremacy and defense of economic gains that they have. So to me, solidarity for Africa looks like taking the instruments we have and the resources we have to understand that cold water has been poured on our face and that the link between foreign aid and development has been broken. If you haven't broken it in your mind, I encourage you to. Now, it means all we have is what we have. Partnerships can come later. And so the instruments we have built, they're all we have, and they are sufficient. For example, the African Free Trade Area, which we think of as trade, and the African Peace Security Architecture, which we think of as peace and security. In fact, the two need to become fused so that peace and security become about building energy and infrastructure corridors with our neighbors so that we're more peaceful with our neighbors. So we come together to suppress militias that are destabilizing Eastern Congo. Why? Because we want to build an East African corridor that has energy, manufacturing, infrastructure, and security. We have the instruments, we just have to imagine how to fuse them. And then we have to find, to come back to my first point, the courageous leaders who give this the breadth and the space that it requires. We have all the instruments. All that's remaining in our mind, or is blocking us, is our imaginations and illusions that the world is coming to rescue Africa. It never was, and it's not now, and it never will. We are the only people who can do it for ourselves.
Wow, wow, wow. Thank you. Your Excellency, you have the final word.
Je prends la dernière phrase.
Thank you very much. I would like to take the last sentence of my brother, the ambassador. I think the first thing is, in terms of challenge, is first of all internal to African countries. We need to take ownership of those problems. We need to take ownership of our future. That's the first step. Internal. Better government of our states and societies, because if we want to have the buy-in from populations, they need to be convinced. They need to be convinced on the types of governance, together with justice, equality, within states. This is what strengthens leaderships, and that gives necessary credibility. Next, intra-African solidarity. When there are Sahel threats in the Sahel, people should not look ahead or look elsewhere. I remember in 2014, I went to Tessalit because Chadian troops were in Tessalit with the United Nations. And when the first attack occurred, and when I came from back to Bamako, I was talking to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, that was then President Bazoum, and I said that if you are not careful, those people who are exploding can invade our capital cities. And a year later, they came to N'Djamena, Ouagadougou, Bamako. So we can't look elsewhere. These are truths. And one or two countries cannot face those challenges. We need to have some sort of solidarity over the continents to fight militias. In 2019, in one of the neighboring rooms, together with President Youssouf, he was the President of the Republic of Niger, we were discussing together with President Kagame, and President Kagame disbursed $1 million for the Sahel G5 as a solidarity gesture. So this is the type of reflections that we need to develop. And this type of reflection needs to be developed, but this is solidarity. And then we will not work on isolation. We have to cooperate with the rest of the world, but based on well-known reciprocal interest. So the ball is on our side. I think 60 years later or 65 later after independence, it is time to take up some kind of assessment at all levels. We need to take ownership because the world is changing. We talked about AI, for example, but we might miss that revolution again, and that would be extremely serious. So it is time. We need to act. We need to act fast, and we have to work with intelligence.
Thank you so
Thank you very much.
What an incredible conversation, and not an easy one, but an important one. I want to thank all the panelists. I'm just going to finish by reminding us that, many of our cultures believe in the spirit of Ubuntu. So it's very easy for us to lean back into that. I am because you are. That mutual respect stands within many of our communities. In Kenya, we have something called Harambee. How many of you have heard about this, the Harambee principle? And if you haven't, thank you, I see a couple of hands. The Harambee principle is when we strive together, we achieve much. When you stand alongside each other, you have extra vigor, energy, and you push harder. And so we have a lot within our own communities, our principles, that we can tap into to give power to African solidarity. Allow me to end with a quote from a great African leader. I can see no security for African states unless African leaders have realized beyond all doubt that the solution of Africa lies in African unity. That was Kwame Nkrumah. Kwame Nkrumah. How many years ago? And so as I look at this room and the power in this room, and many who are watching on screens in different parts of the continent and the world, as Africans, what are you going to do about this? Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. An interesting video indeed, as I said earlier. It seems many Africans has had enough, and we have started asking questions. And this time it's not just going to be questions. I think it's about time we sit up. It's about time we wake up and reject any oppressor. Reject anyone who don't mean well for this continent. As Julie Gichuru said, we were in our continent where NATO, which is Western country organization, came in to destroy Libya. They came in to destroy Libya. Later, they have accepted their mistake. The people who were involved, like Barack Obama and Tony Blair and all those people, has accepted their mistake. That Libya situation shouldn't have happened. But we sat back. We couldn't do anything because I don't know if African Union was powerless. They were able to warn African unions that they shouldn't step their foot in Libyan soil because they can't guarantee their safety. In our own continent, this thing happened. And we couldn't say anything. This were not the first time an African leader was being ousted without his will by NATO or by any Western organizations. This has been happening in African continent for a very long time. And it's either they oust you out or they try to destroy your economy through sanctions so that you can give up whatever they want from you. We know some happens to Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe economy were destroyed because Robert Mugabe resisted what the Western countries wanted from him. It's about time Africa, we even stop looking for help from Western countries and start helping ourselves. As the continent, we have huge population that we can trade among ourselves for a better future. Because Recently, Wudimaya said something which is very important. Africa has no friend. Don't think if you sack America, you sack France, you sack UK, and you bring in China or Russia, they are going to be a better friend. That's not going to happen. Everyone is moving for their interests. Everyone is moving for their interests. Nanama Edu, and a Ghanaian author, late Ghanaian author, says something that he can't blame the Western country for fighting for their survival. She can't blame the Western country for fighting for their survival. But it's up to us for us to also fight for our survival. Africans, it's about time we have to start fighting for our survival because they have taken enough from us. They have manipulated us enough. And it's very sad that we keep on buying into their ideologies. We keep on buying into their political systems. We keep on buying into things that will not help Africa. It's about time we sit up. It's about time we wake up from our slumber. It's about time we liberate our mindset. It's about time we enlighten ourselves. And it's about time we educate ourselves and the new generation. That is up to us to solve our own problem, but not up to the Western countries. Please, if today is your first time coming to this channel, then don't forget to subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification button so that anytime I upload any great content, you will be notified. I'm always your guy, De-Graft Amoako. Thanks for watching.